All right, so welcome everyone. This is a lovely Tuesday morning. It is wet and raining in Vancouver. I don't know where you are, but hopefully it's been better weather. But that doesn't necessarily take away from it being a beautiful day and having been blessed with another day of our lives. So often we get caught up with the day of the week and having to work, especially when we're working in corporate. It can sometimes get to us. But it's also the fact that we're blessed with another day. Not many people, well, many people don't get to live today, and there's so much things that we have to be grateful for. So today, I'm just grateful for being around, enjoying a wet, rainy day in Vancouver, and it's a bit different from London right now, where I think there's a heat wave, and certainly enjoying a bit cooler weather. And taking advantage of that for sure. And I think everyone here, it's just for a coffee break. So if you haven't already grabbed your coffee, and let's get to it. So it's just answering questions that are out there, just in terms of how you're feeling with regards to the emotional load, and just corporate in general. How you're dealing with the stress and the anxiety that comes with the corporate workspace, because it certainly was a heavy load that I carried. And it took years for me to reach the burnout stage, but I did end up getting there because it was a weight that I carried with me year in, year out. So just a few questions here for you. The first is, have you ever procrastinated on a hard, important task? I certainly have. And when I do, I can come up with all sorts of excuses. It's those delays, whatever excuse I'm saying, to delay it. It ends up winning. It sounds logical, but then that task is certainly looming over me over the days until I actually get to that task. And it seems like a larger task than it actually is when you get started and break it down into steps. So have you ever been irritable when stressed or under the pressure, when you've got too much work to do and too little time? I certainly have been that at certain times when everything's coming at me. Partners from the firms need too much for me to do in any one time, and I can be irritable if I haven't necessarily had a chance to eat that day or got my coffee that day. And yeah, just getting a break of time to myself. So when you're stuck at your desk, just not able to do everything that's being asked of you. And then have you ever caught yourself overthinking or overanalyzing something you said or did and how that could be interpreted? So once again, I certainly have done that. I don't know about you, but I certainly have. And it's one where you try and you say something and it's like, oh, they could have interpreted that slightly differently, and then try and correct it, and then think about, should I have done that correction in that meeting or just spoken to them outside? I've also had partners where they spent 2 hours trying to perfect this fee email for a client, and that email, I personally would have sent it but they spent an additional 2 hours trying to perfect it, trying to anticipate any type of interpretation for how something could be interpreted. And so it certainly impacts not just people starting in their career, not just people in the middle of their career, but also at the top. So if this is you, don't worry, it does happen to all of us. And so sometimes it's difficult to understand and make sense of things or how to handle situations. And this is where a safe space like Thrive Space can help. the guidance and encouragement you need when you don't know where to turn. So I certainly had instances where, I was facing challenging situations and I didn't necessarily know who to turn to. So I did certainly have mentors, but they were, from Vancouver and not from, say, like London. And so their experience was completely different. I had friends and family once again, but they weren't necessarily in the career that I was in. So I felt sometimes alone, not necessarily knowing where to turn to. And that's why I created Thrive Space, so that, you don't have to feel like you're alone. So I've been, to many different countries. I've also worked in a number of countries, whether it was Asia, or North America or Europe. I've been there, I've done that. I kind of have learned the hard ways, but you don't necessarily have to learn the hard ways. Learn about the stress strategies available to you. So definitely join the community if that's what you're seeking, because it can truly help. So thanks for joining me today for this coffee break. I hope you do once again have your coffee, and we're here to answer your questions. So today I know about 7 questions that have come up, but please do pop your question in if there's one that comes to mind while we're going through. So what are the 7 questions that I mentioned? So what have come up is, first, how do I set boundaries without coming across as uncommitted? So boundary setting is huge for our well-being, and is something that I personally struggled with. So you don't get to a stage where partners joke about, they have to replace you with 5 people if you actually upheld your boundaries. So certainly something that I have learned to do over the years, and sometimes I haven't necessarily been consistent with that. So when you're not consistent, it can create ambivalence. And then, people don't know where you stand. And also, if you've said yes to things in the past and then all of a sudden say no, it's harder than just saying no in the first place. So setting that precedent, so it can be done, but it just makes it a bit harder. The second question there is, how can I manage the emotional impact of making a mistake or receiving feedback? So we've all been there with the feedback sandwich. And as soon as you anticipate that negative point coming through, and as soon as you receive it, it's just it's hard hitting sometimes, especially when you've put in all of the effort into the project. The third here is, how do I stop the pressure to check work emails and messages on the weekend? So I certainly let work spill into my weekends, spill into my holidays. But how do we stop that from happening? And for me, it was the high pressure, high stakes projects where you're expected to always be on. And being those global companies, the time zones certainly did not help. So the fourth question here, how do I express my authentic self and values in a highly traditional or hierarchical workplace? So some of these corporates environments, especially in London, I found it's challenging to speak up. The partners, I was in rooms where partners would only speak to the directors and ignore the rest of us because we weren't important enough for them. So if something's wrong, how do you actually get the courage to speak up? And the impact of that on your career, for instance. The fifth question is, how do I tell my manager I'm burnt out without looking incompetent? So it's, how do you be vulnerable, right? And when you fear the consequences of that vulnerability. And then the sixth one is, how do I prioritize? How do I prioritize when everything's urgent? So I don't know about you, but I certainly have been in environments where everything is urgent. All of my bosses always thought their task was the top priority. So how do you actually manage this? And then the last question here, the one that can be tough, especially early in our careers, how do we deal with the micromanager who is stressing me out? So I was a micromanager, at least in my first year as a manager, because I was learning the role. And when you're learning a role, when you're sort of feeling that you have got to maintain your reputation while still being in this new role, it can create these types of behaviors that turn out to be micromanaging. And so how do you actually manage the micromanager? So I definitely have tips for that, having been one myself at one stage, and then how did I step back from being that micromanager? So first question off first question is, how do I set boundaries without seeming uncommitted? So this is something that is vital to our well-being: boundaries, communication. We want to disconnect, we want to push back, but we fear the consequences. The fear of saying no, does that mean that that's the end of my job or my promotion chances, or even just will I be thought of if I, for future opportunities? So what we can do to manage this is really in our communication. And first off, validating the priority. So acknowledging the importance of the task. So it doesn't sort of lessen the importance of that task and that person. We might have other priorities, but that person wants to feel important in the moment. So acknowledging that is important. And then it's the positive phrases. So we might not be able to do that task that they want us to do, but what can we do? So this is things like providing alternatives or showing that we are committed, right? So one of the statements we can say is, I've already delivered 50 hours this week. I need this evening as a break to ensure I'm fresh and effective tomorrow, because I know that this task requires high quality focus. So showing that work ethic in terms of what you've already contributed shows your commitment, as well as your commitment to quality. You want to put in the highest quality, but you need this break in order to be that fresh start and focus that this task actually needs. So this maintains your well-being, but revised timing. So pushing it to tomorrow, which might not always be the best thing, but it can sort of push it from today into tomorrow in a nice way that values the task itself. So the next phrase that you can use is, I would love to help you with this project, but I currently have 2 priority projects on my plate. I will not be available to help you until next week. So once again, this revises the timing. It shows a more realistic timing, but it also shows the desire to help. Another one, like I said, that builds on this is being flexible with timing and scope. So providing the alternatives. So an example of this is, the task will take 100 hours. It's not feasible to deliver that this week. But if the deadline is set, what can we descope to ensure that we meet this deadline? So I'm using the what can we descope, the what, rather than can we descope anything, because it's not optional, right? So the what is really defining the need to deprioritize something or descope something within it. The next piece is also important, is the be reliable. So following through on what you say. So say what you do. The integrity is so important, because then those alternatives actually mean something. They know that you're going to deliver it the next day or the next week. So this is all important for this key question that we do come across. We all come across it. How do we set boundaries without seeming uncommitted? And that is, first, acknowledging the importance. Second is using the positive phrases, highlighting what can be done. And third, follow through. So the second question that came up is, how can I manage the emotional load or the emotional impact of having made a mistake or receiving that negative feedback? And we all are familiar with that feedback sandwich. That negative point in the middle sometimes can hit hard. So I used to personalize failure, and I've made my fair share of mistakes. But how do I not let that get me down? The boundaries, like I said, are vital. They create a life outside. This is important because this is where I went wrong. As often, prioritizing work over everything else, that is where our identity can then be tied too heavily to work, because all of our waking hours, everything we do is basically work. And so then criticism of our work then hits our identity, our core. So rather than a simple improvement point for our work and a lesson learned, it then feels like a true criticism to ourselves. So the first point is to calm our nervous system in a moment. And we can do this with coping mechanisms such as breathing techniques. So deep breaths can calm the nervous system, avoid the panic and the defensive response. The second element is this separating the identity. So I alluded to this. Identity based on multiple dimensions is less impacted by a single dimension. So a critique of my work, not me. And the third one is change the perspective. So most of the time, the intention behind feedback is good. It means well. It's based on the other person's perspective and experience. So view it as a learning opportunity. At the very least, it's a lesson about how things can be interpreted. So seeking clarity and understanding rather than defending. So if we recap here for this question, where is how can I manage the emotional impact of making a mistake or receiving feedback? We can calm the nervous system in the moment. We can separate your identity by building a life outside of work, making sure that you've got those boundaries to do so, and then focus on the learning. So the third question was, how do I stop the pressure to check the emails on weekends and holidays, taking your laptop everywhere? Well, we can do this. We talked about this in our Spark Speaker Series, Connected But Alone with Travis Loveland. And there were periods where I communicated in set times that I would be online or checking notifications or changing locations and said, I will be back online at this particular time. So this was accepted by bosses, and it meant my weekend was not constantly checking emails. So when I did not do this, my weekend was consumed by being online and always thinking about work, even if I wasn't at the laptop. So this constant load of thinking about work or always being on drained my energy, and I wasn't necessarily being present within the moment, present within the conversations I was having. So what can we do? Well, first, we can create the time slots that I mentioned. Time slots are for emergencies. So clarify what's defined as an emergency. What can't wait until Monday? Because more often than not, like things can wait until Monday. The urgency is a false urgency. So pick a short time to look at messages only if an emergency happens. The second is automatic replies. So communicate boundaries with stakeholders and then set automatic out-of-office replies for the weekend. This helps reinforce the message that you're not available on the weekends. The third is avoid the pings. So even if they might be working and they don't necessarily have boundaries, you don't need to hear about it. So turn off those notifications on your work phone. The do not disturb on your work phone is important, so you can avoid the notifications, because every time you hear a ping, it can send your nervous system into overdrive for at least 10 seconds. So it can take you out. It can bring you the stress that you want to avoid on your weekends. Weekends are for relaxing, apparently. And I'm learning that these days to an extent. So how do I stop the pressure to check my work emails and messages on the weekends? First, use the time slot for emergencies. Second, automatic replies. And third, avoid those pings. Put it on do not disturb. All right, so we're partway through or halfway through, really, these questions. Hope these are really helpful for you, and that you can actually feel like you can put these into place these days. So something like this week. So the first one was just talking about, just going back here. to the questions. What did we have? We had the first one here. It was, how do I communicate those boundaries that are ever so important and while still being committed? We then had the, how do I manage the emotional impact of making a mistake and feedback? So that in the moment negativity, how could we let it not get us down? And the third was the weekend emails, the once you've created those boundaries, how do you stop the urge to check your emails and so on? So we are certainly going through these quite a bit. And the fourth one that we've got is also important. So the fourth one, as I go through this, hope these are very helpful for you. And it would help if I remembered the fourth one. The fourth one, of course, this is actually one of the more important ones, is how do I express my authentic self and values in a highly traditional or hierarchical workplace? So this is a challenging one because I've been in the London environments where the partners walk in and they only speak to the directors. Everyone else is non-existent to them. And when you're in that type of environment, it's hard to sort of like hold your boundaries for your well-being. And it's also hard to speak up when you think something's wrong. So I definitely spoke up in these rooms when I knew it was not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to just be like, no, hear yes people. And it possibly had career implications for me. So I felt, like I said, that they just wanted yes people. They didn't necessarily want to hear a contrary view or some of the risks involved with going down a certain path. So when I did speak up, I didn't have regrets because I stayed true to myself, and it was one of the key values that I had. So there is a balance, deciding when to speak up and ranking your values. So knowing when it's right to speak up versus, some of the smaller things you can sort of let go, right? And it's aligning to your highest value. So if your highest value says speak up, absolutely speak up, because alignment is more important than anything. So doing this also adds clarity. So people know where you stand. Where if you're being inconsistent with when you speak up and when you don't, it can create ambivalence, which is more damaging than not being true to yourself. So when choosing to speak up, how can we do this to make sure that it's better received? And the first way we can do this is by seeking understanding. So before we speak up, understanding why someone might be pushing a particular agenda or a particular objective, that is certainly important. Understanding their perspective, because we might not necessarily appreciate where they're coming from, their experience, or what they might be, as was focused on going forward. So having that understanding, seeking that clarity is really important before you speak up, or even asking the questions if you're uncertain as to why this person's going down this particular pathway. The second is to connect to the stakeholders' interests or the company's results. So this is really important to get that connection and be able to land that message well. So have that person receive it and actually consider it. So linking to the other person's values or interests, underlying interests, or the company's goals is certainly important, and communicating that linkage when you do speak up. The third, as I sort of alluded to before, is pick your opportunities. So in the corporate environment, it might not necessarily be speak up every single time you have something to say, but it might be sort of like, speak up when it's really important to you. And it's those crucial times is when you certainly do need to speak up. The reality of the corporate world is I wanted to avoid the label of being difficult. And certainly I know people who got the label of difficult because they spoke up each and every time. And so picking your opportunities as to when you speak up, it then just defines and clarifies to people where your values lie. So pick the discussions, certainly, and you might sort of like let go of small disagreements, focus on what's core to your values. So in this, we've got the question, so how do I express my authentic self in a highly traditional and hierarchical workplace? And it's first, seek the understanding. So once you have that understanding, you can then connect to their underlying interests, connect to that understanding and the company results, what's in the best interest for them, frame it in a way that's the best interest for them, and then pick your opportunities. So it might not necessarily be every occasion that you do this, but certainly the ones that are core to your values, your highest values. All right. And we're going on here to number 5. So what is number 5? How do I tell my manager that I'm burnt out without looking incompetent? So the important thing to remember is that each of us have different experiences, different strengths, different weaknesses, as well as different tolerance levels for certain things. So, some people might be highly tolerant in one area, others might be highly tolerant in another. So we're all different. And I think these days, leadership does appreciate that there is more stress and there's a lot of understanding these days. So it's different times, more work, more uncertainty, more stress, because even leadership is feeling this way. So for these conversations, I put myself in the other person's shoes. What implications would this have on them? And would this be what would be their main concern or their main interest? So understanding that, and if you don't know that, ask, right? So don't assume, certainly frame it in a way that's more of a question. So first off, how do we actually frame this? Stick with the facts, right? So with the vulnerability, there can be emotional involved. But if you're not necessarily connecting with the other person, first start with the facts. And that is going to help, particularly with these individuals who compartmentalize everything, which can be the case in these hierarchical environments. The second is to either choose a risk structure if you're in a burnout stage, or a full-time off. So in a risk structure, first state your commitment to the role and the project, acknowledging the importance of it, and then use a 1-3-1 approach. So present one core capacity problem and offer 3 potential workflow adjustments, and then recommend your preferred choice. So I've done this where I've offered alternatives and then a recommended choice. Do they always go with my recommended choice? Certainly not. But as long as they went with one of the options, it provided them with options, it provided them with a solution. So you're still solution focused, and you're still showing the importance, your commitment to the job, wanting the best for the job. And the workload adjustments can include things like timing, scope, and allocations, the delegation that we spoke about previously in the first one, where it was talking about the boundaries. The second option is the full-time off, right? So in a burnout stage, I had a full-time off. I didn't necessarily use this statement, but a statement that you can use is, I understand this project is critical for the firm. I'm exhausted because I've not been recovering from my sleep, thinking about the work constantly. I'm working extended hours. I believe I have burnout symptoms. And could you really use some time off? So appreciating the importance of this project, I can speak to resourcing or staffing to see if I can get a replacement. I can also outline where I'm at and what I'm working on, as well as the key outstandings by the end of the day. So this provides the timeline as well as sort of an update for them. I want to give this project the high quality attention it warrants, and I'm feeling I need some time away in order to come back with the energy and focus. So you've got the projects, the best interest of the project in mind. in terms of like how you're framing this. So this is certainly something that one can try. And I don't necessarily know if this is something you want to try, but it is certainly important if you are feeling burnt out to have that one-on-one conversation with your manager. So start with the facts, the hours, the project, acknowledging that the project is important, but also what state you're in. And you don't necessarily need to get emotional, but sometimes the emotions do come up. And that is okay. Just breathe in the moment. Then next is to provide either a restructure, if you're able to do a restructure approach, or a complete time off if you need a few days off in order to be able to get through it and back to the focus. So let's move on to question number 6. And question number 6 is, how do I prioritize when everything is urgent? So I know that we're going over time. It's been half an hour. I do hopefully your coffee is not cold. You're actually drinking it as you go through here. But these are certainly important practical strategies that you can use in the everyday based on the questions that are being asked these days. So how do I prioritize when everything's urgent? Stay with us for this, because I'm sure that you're dealing with this in a constant state, because that's how the world works these days in these work environments. So to over deliver, we've got questions number 6 and 7. Stay with us for these insights and practical strategies. Let me go through them fairly quickly for you, and do ask questions if you've got any questions. Also ask for feedback. Give us any feedback if you're attending the session. It would be very helpful, but let's go through them. So first is the priority rule. So the 3 priority rule, being clear on your vision and your goals, because otherwise you can get caught up in other people's goals and not address what's actually important to you, where you want your life to go. So the night before, what I do is I narrow my task list down to 3 priority items, and these are my intentional actions for the day. So what's actually going to move the needle? The rest is noise, other people's priorities, or just lower priority items. The next is using a sorting model. So this can be a brain dump and then applying a sorting model, such as the Eisenhower matrix. This is one example. You don't necessarily need to use this, but it's got 4 boxes. You do what's first, which is urgent and important. Then you schedule what's important but not urgent. And you delegate what's urgent but not important. And then you eliminate what's neither urgent nor important. Another example of a sorting model is the 4 Ds. So this is something that is encouraged at the partner level of the Big 4 firms, and that is do, delegate, delay, and then delete. So it's actually, they do it in reverse. So delete anything in your inbox that is not necessary, delay anything that's not urgent, delegate anything that you can delegate or can do with coaching, and then just that leaves you with the do. So hopefully that narrows things down, at least in your inbox. I have not necessarily been applying that late, but it's something that I know I can do. And then the last is communicate your update with stakeholders with your priorities and what they can expect when they can expect that task delivery. So especially if you're pushing something back as a lower priority because it's not your main priority, make sure that you have that communication. So what we have for number 6 is, how do I prioritize when everything is urgent? First, use the 3 priority rule. So narrow your task list down to just 3 items. Realistically, we can get through 3 items in a day, depending on the task. Don't beat yourself up if you don't get through them, but certainly narrow down your task list to 3 items. Use a sorting model. I just went over 2 of the models, so the 4 Ds and the Eisenhower model. And then the 3rd is communication. So communication is key with regards to priorities. Help people know when and what will be delivered. All right, we're down to the 7th one, the 7th and final question that I'm going over today. If you've submitted your question, don't worry, we'll have another coffee break and I will get to those questions. So you have a micromanager that increases your stress levels. How do you actually deal with this micromanager? So micromanaging is a form of fear and anxiety. So recognize this is important. Use compassion. Compassion for this individual is important as well. And how we can do that is being proactive in addressing it. So use brief, frequent updates. This reduces the anxiety, the possibility driving the behavior. It helps them avoid the uncertainty, the unknown, right? Knowing where things are at helps them reduce their anxiety. Next is follow through. So doing the tasks well and on time. This helps build trust. So once again, if they've got trust, it reduces anxiety. And the third is break things down and to show what's actually realistic. So this could help manage expectations. So certainly you want to help manage expectations. With micromanagers, yes, they might be on top of the detail, but they might not necessarily know how long something might take for you because you've got different experience to them. So breaking it down and sort of just saying, this is how long it's going to take me will help with that timing. All right. So number 7 was, how do I deal with the micromanager that's stressing me out? And it's through brief, frequent updates. The follow through to build trust and break things down to show what's actually realistic. So for more day 1 insights and relief, check out our Spark Speaker Series. Topics covering such as managing relationships, embracing change, reclaiming energy, and managing anxiety, connected but alone, especially with things like managing anxiety. We not only talk about coping mechanisms for in the moment, like the breathing exercises, the grounding exercises, but we also talk about processing the emotions to break the actual cycle. So I don't know if you've been caught in an anxiety spiral where, like, just shifts from overthinking to over preparing to ruminating around, conversations. That is an anxiety cycle, and you can break that cycle by talking about or by listening to some of the strategies we speak about in our Spark Speaker Series. So definitely useful if you need day 1 relief. If you're beyond that and are looking to not just survive the work days, but actually thrive, Clarity Under Pressure is for you. So definitely check this out. This course, it's got 5 modules. Module 1 is about communication and influence. So this underpins everything we do. Communication and influence is so important. It gets us to where we actually want to go. We cannot get to where we want to go without enhancing these skills. And these are soft skills that are ever more important these days. The next is emotional intelligence. This goes hand in hand with communication and influence because decisions are emotional. So, when people are sad, people look to safety. People look for the familiar. So if you're sort of pitching an idea, a new way of doing things, if they're sad, if you make them sad with regards to your communication, it's going to drive the response of no, right? So knowing that linkage is going to help you get to where you want to go and get people to be open to new ideas or be open to your suggestions. So very critical. The next one is identity and resilience. This is about, like I said before, the boundaries and knowing, being able to create those boundaries, being able to create the identity. So we spoke about, creating a separate identity on this live stream today, but this goes into how you actually create it and how you bounce back, that rapid recovery when you do get a setback. And then, of course, in a world full of anxiety and uncertainty, focus with intention. So we've got so many distractions, so many pings, so many emails, all coming at us at once. How do we focus on what's actually important, what's actually going to move the needle? And then the last is decisions with uncertainty. So this is where we talk about, I suppose, how to actually make those decisions where we're not certain about how to move forward, which is the right response. And it's not necessarily about seeing the whole staircase, it's only about seeing the next step. So we talk about that. We talk about how to do that, different strategies of how to do that within Clarity Under Pressure. So we are almost at the end of July. This is the last week of July, more than halfway through 2026. So how do you want 2026 to count? 2026 could be your year to transform, have a transformational change that enables you to live the life you want. If you're going to live 100 years, do not live the same year 100 times. Is 2026 looking exactly like 2025? The same results, the same feelings, the same emotions. And are you actually getting where you want to go? If the answer is no, then definitely check out our Clarity Under Pressure series. It's going to help you drive you forward. Take a step back, pause, reflect on Clarity Under Pressure reflection series. It's got great reflection exercises to do. And then you can also practice with the accelerator AI simulation to practice different scenarios, different strategies, setting those boundary communications, because I know I'm not the only one who struggles with that. Invest in yourself. It's the best investment you'll make. It'll pay off for the rest of your life. That is a quote from Warren Buffett, one of our most successful business men in the world today. So it's a quote from him. It's about investing in yourself. I suppose it's also, if you don't invest in yourself, it is, I suppose, going to hurt you in the long run. Because if you don't invest in yourself today, you'll lose out on the results you want. You're going to be prioritizing everyone else's needs, everyone else's priorities, everyone else's urgencies, and losing focus on what's actually going to move the needle for you towards the life you want, a happier life, a more improved well-being, that promotion that you want. What do you want to be? Where do you want to be a year from now? Who do you want to be, 5 years from now? It's those goals that are actually important, and that breaking that down into the everyday is what the Clarity Under Pressure series helps you with. So take advantage of our exclusive 40% July discount. Take advantage of it today. It's only a few days available, and so certainly take advantage of that. And then, of course, we've got, if you don't sort of move that forward, it's about other people's urgencies, other people's priorities and goals are going to run your life. And it's going to consume your life such that you then don't have the time to focus on yourself. So control your destiny, or someone else will. And I suppose that's it for today. Thank you for joining. There's a few action items that you can complete today or do right now, which is sign up for our school community for more insights. We do have more live streams as well, so stay tuned for our live streams. We've got them weekly, or at least weekly, so do stay tuned in for them. But also, in the meantime, there's a lot of resources available on our school community, and then also, if you need day one relief, if you need that relief today, reach out, just say so, and you'll get that encouragement and support. Take advantage of the Clarity Under Pressure discount, the 40% discount for July. The discount code is CLARITY. It's all capitals, so make sure that it's all capitals, and go to our website. There's a QR code, or there's the full URL down below. Do that today, and thank you. Hope you have a great afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are, and have a great one. I hope you have a clear, stressless today with these questions answered. Have a lovely day,